This is 9/11, 10 years after. From WMAL and the museum, where history lives. Here is Torie Clarke.
With us is Bret Baier, the anchor of Special Report on the Fox News Channel, who I feel like I've known for 1,000 years. And Bret, you're this rock star at Fox now, doing amazing things. And you've interviewed presidents, and you've interviewed generals, and you've done specials on these huge issues that face our country. But just for a little bit, take us back to September 11th, 2001. I know where you were, but you tell us where you were and what happened.
I was, at the time, the Southeast correspondent based in Atlanta, and had been down there since really the beginning of Fox, shortly after Fox started. The first plane hit, and believe it or not, I was called up to New York as a backup reporter. And
even after the first plane?
It was just, we knew we had to do live shots for affiliates. It was going to be a big story. They sent us moving. And they actually told us to drive, to be back up the next day. And
so what did you drive?
I was driving with a producer from Atlanta. And the second plane hit, and they said, step on it. The third plane hit, and we were about an hour outside Atlanta by that point. And they said, we want to reroute you to the Pentagon. And we got there as fast as we could. You'll remember Fox didn't fully staff with a reporter, a correspondent.
Right.
We rotated people in. We had a full-time producer there. And so I got there and started doing live shots for affiliates, Fox affiliates around the country from the Citgo station right there that evening.
Right. What were your thoughts? You're still young, youthful, a baby. But back then you were about 4 years old.
Yeah, right.
Really. What were the thoughts going through that Citgo? That was the briefing room. That was the ad hoc briefing room, if you will, and that's where most of the media were stationed. It was about a quarter mile up a hill from the Pentagon. What was going through your head as you were trying to do your job?
I mean, it was just amazing. It was an amazing thing to see the burning Pentagon and getting these briefings from officials who were trying to find bodies in the wreckage and trying to fully grasp how many rings this plane had gone through, as you know, the 5 rings of the Pentagon, and how deep it went in there and how many people were affected. And meanwhile, thinking that another terrorist attack, another plane could be looming. So, it was just nonstop. And I remember thinking, we've got to do this day and then think about the next day. So, I mean, you're kind of just in the moment.
Right. Things were changing so quickly. It was so hard to get real information.
It really was.
I remember you all, with very, very good reason, wanted to know. The number one concern people had was loss of life. How many people on the plane? How many people in the building? And there was no way of knowing for hours and hours and hours.
Yeah,
and
I can only imagine from your perspective on the inside what that had to be like. But so that was my first day, and it continued like that, doing affiliate shots for Fox affiliates around the country. Then about I can't remember the exact time, but I think it was 2 weeks maybe. They said, "Do you want to be the Pentagon correspondent?" And I said, "Yes." And the next, I don't know how many days it was, but I was on a trip with you and Secretary Rumsfeld.
Right.
And he was making the case for war overseas and in Afghanistan, and traveling to Oman and a couple of other places, Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
I was on a satellite phone and called a buddy of mine and told him to find me an apartment in Washington, D.C., and he did. And Fox packed up my stuff in Atlanta, and I never went back.
That's amazing.
That was the beginning of my life in Washington, D.C.
It really was, and it really, really started your amazing career. Weren't you in Rockford?
I was.
Right?
Yeah.
You paid your dues, but this really launched your career, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, there was nothing like it. I mean, and we traveled the world with Secretary Rumsfeld and seeing firsthand the beginnings of the war in Afghanistan and then the war in Iraq. 5 years at the Pentagon, I think, is really, it's the best place for a reporter.
Yeah, talk about that, because some people would say it was a baptism of fire to the nth degree, but talk about why you thought it was an advantage to be there for a few years covering the Pentagon.
Well, I mean, there's nothing like that place as far as Washington is concerned. And first of all, it was the focus of the entire news world, was what we are doing as a country on the war front. And so it was in the spotlight, number one. Number two, you could go around the Pentagon even as a reporter, and 19 and a half miles of corridor, and talk to different people and different agencies, different military branches, and get little pieces of a quilt, I used to say, a story, and then take it to somebody else. And you hated this, but we had, various sources in the same building.
Yeah.
That you pieced together the story until you got what you thought was, the accurate picture.
Yeah. No, as frustrating as it could be sometimes, as a citizen, I always appreciated, and somebody in the information space, I always appreciated that the Pentagon, of all places, was the only agency in town, the only government building in town, where media could and did roam freely throughout the building. And I will never forget, sometimes we'd have foreign delegations in the building, you'd be walking down the hallway with them, and they'd see reporters cruising all over the place. They couldn't believe it. One actually said to me once, "Don't you keep them in a pen?" I said, "No."
You wish.
No, I think it's far, far better that you were able to do that, because I think the more transparent government can be, the more access the people through you can have to their government officials, the better off we are.
Well, to your credit, that was the thought behind the embedding process, and really that changed the entire perspective of covering a war. And, there was all this criticism about, if you're embedded with the military, are you going to be, since you're being protected by them, are you going to somehow, not write the hard stories? I don't think that was the case.
Yeah.
And I always felt that program enabled, not only did it enable us to get a window into people on the front lines and how they operate, but it also instructed a whole new generation of people, reporters, who could come back to their newsrooms and say, hey, listen, these military guys are not that bad. They're trying to do X, Y, and Z, and here's what I saw firsthand. It opened a window into reporting that really hadn't been there since, I think, the Vietnam War.
Yeah, and I also saw on the side of the military, it opened a lot of eyes, and they would come back to their offices, or they'd come back to their base and say, these folks in the media, most of them are really trying hard to do very difficult jobs. And so I think it did increase the confidence and the appreciation between the two institutions. But think about how things have changed in your business, Bret, since even 2001 or 2003, start of the Iraq War, just the technology. We didn't have blogs. We didn't have Twitter. We didn't have Facebook, those things back then. That is now very much a part of your job, right? Very much part of what you do. Talk to us a little bit about how the actual technical aspects of your job have changed.
Yeah, it changes dramatically. As I'm talking to you, I just, dump down something on Facebook saying what's on the show.